Hey everyone, welcome to today's video. This video is in collaboration with MichelleG. I will link her channel down below. Today we are talking about why for us, just being secular is not enough for homeschool curriculum. Why secular is not enough. If you're new here, my name is Kara. I'm a former librarian turned homeschool mom to 2 kids. I will have a 5th grader and an 8th grader in this upcoming school year. So let's get into the topic. Oh, let me also say, I'd love to have you comment on this video, but try to watch the whole thing before you comment, because I've had some comments recently that it's really clear that they did not watch the whole video. So here we are, secular curriculum. So we are secular homeschoolers. But secular doesn't mean inclusive or progressive or even accurate, if I'm being honest. If our curriculum only tells one story, then my kids are getting a filtered, distorted version of reality. And I read a quote recently, and it said, I'm going to read it so that I don't mess it up. It says, "The single story creates stereotypes, and the problem with stereotypes is not that they are untrue, but that they're incomplete." Also, I have notes in front of me, so if you see me looking down, it's because I really wanted to organize my thoughts for this video, and if you know me, you know that that's difficult. So I wrote some things down. But anyway, so for a lot of homeschoolers, choosing a secular curricular simply means that the content isn't religious. For me and for my homeschool, I've come to realize that that's not enough. I consider our homeschool, well, our home, and by extension, our homeschool, to be secular, but also to be liberal and progressive and inclusive. And so for us, secular is not enough. It's incomplete. So you may wonder what do I aim for our home, and by extension, our homeschool, to be like? Those things kind of guide now how I pick our curriculum. So in our house, religion isn't like a guiding framework. It doesn't inform our decision making. We acknowledge different worldviews. We respect different worldviews. We emphasize personal freedom, individual rights, social justice, social equality. We frequently have conversations about democracy and civil rights and justice and things like that. I feel like we're actively working to challenge in our home that we're actively working to challenge outdated norms, whether that be around gender, race, ability, whatever. Getting to this point has been a process for me, and it's evolved and it continues to evolve throughout our homeschooling. It evolves each and every year, each and every day. I don't just want curriculum that omits religious doctrine. I want curriculum that reflects things like critical thinking, social justice, inclusivity, respect for all identities and worldviews. So that means trying to use curriculum and materials that don't focus on one cultural or gender lens as the norm. Or as the default, I guess, might be a better way to say that. It means trying to use materials that don't erase marginalized groups or marginalized histories. And it involves using materials that don't promote outdated social norms in favor of staying neutral, I guess. So a lot of secular curriculums, even though they're secular, they don't have religious materials in them. They fall short in this area. And so for me, that's becoming a problem. So they may avoid overt religious content, but they still may come from a Eurocentric Western civilization point of view. They may reinforce very rigid gender stereotypes and roles, or traditional family structures. They might fail to address systematic inequalities. They may fail to decolonize history. Now, I know what you're thinking. Kara, aren't you using core knowledge, U.S. history next year for your history? And that's totally Eurocentric. Well, yes, we are using core knowledge, US history next year. Yes, the reader itself is very Eurocentric, and the curriculum is built around a traditional Eurocentric narrative. And if I'm being honest, that's one of the reasons we plan to use it intentionally. I think that it's essential for my kids to recognize dominant cultural frameworks so that they can then question and challenge them by engaging critically and with core knowledge and using the additional resources. Sorry, I have a squeaky chair, but using core knowledge, using those additional resources that it provides, as well as some of my own, because let's be honest, I like to gather resources and I can't help but, you know, I just love that part of finding resources. So there will always be some of my own kind of put in there. But we can learn how narratives are constructed. We can learn how power shapes the stories that we're told. And we can learn how to think beyond that. Just a second. Sorry, I've got kids coming in and out of the house. But I really like the idea of approaching history from the same narrative that everyone else is learning it from, but then going past that. I think that it makes us better able to recognize the holes and to recognize what perspectives are missing and to really begin to think critically and question those things. So I like the idea of using that traditional narrative as our spine. So we're using core knowledge, US history, as a spine, not as a script. A spine, not a script. And I think that that's an important distinction. That means we will bring in any missing perspectives, but that also means recognizing that core knowledge is providing a lot of that for us. And that's why I feel like people are missing that component just within like the first 6 weeks of the curriculum that I have planned so far. The book list itself that they provide, they're including in and out. I think we're good. So I would not recommend using the Core Knowledge Reader alone without the other supporting materials that Core Knowledge has created. Sorry, I have this horrible glare because I just turned my computer on to check something. Glasses are such a problem, man. They include a book list that has fantastic resources on it that you can include. It has Stamped by Jason Reynolds. It has, what's the other one? Before 1493 by Charles Mann. It has An Indigenous People's History of the United States. It has A Different Mirror. It has so many good books. There's a few that I found that are problematic, but there's a lot of good stuff there. And just in the first 6 weeks alone, based on the activities that are provided in the teaching materials for Core Knowledge, we're looking at what goes into history and how to recognize groups that have been left out, and how would you feel if you were a group that was left out of that history. We're looking at specific Indigenous groups and how they live then and now, which is so important because so much talk of like Indigenous peoples focuses on them as a thing of the past and not recognizing that they are people right now in our present. We're looking at all of that through reputable, curated resources that they put together. We're looking at how and why stereotypes and generalizations gave us this faulty picture of Native American. Oh my gosh. I think we're in now. Anyway, we're looking at how and why these stereotypes and generalizations gave us a faulty picture of Native American people and cultures. We're using primary source documents. We're looking at European exploration. from the viewpoint of Indigenous Americans, while specifically recognizing that the story told was from European perspectives and was missing other viewpoints. So we're learning how to analyze documents. We're learning to apply critical thinking skills. We're learning how to see what was left out of the textbook narrative. Let me be clear on what I'm saying in this video, because I feel like I don't want to be contradicting myself, all right? But so let me try to be clear here. Being a progressive homeschooler doesn't mean that you have to reject, doesn't mean that I have to reject every imperfect resource. It means that I'm going to use the tools with my eyes wide open. I'm going to use the resources I'm going to be able to see both the strengths and the weaknesses and identify the limitations of a resource. So this is probably one of the few times that I will say this. And to me, that is that core knowledge's intention doesn't really matter to me. By that, I mean that, you know, why are the additional activities, which to me are kind of the meat of the curriculum, why are those not within the teacher guide? Why are those in a separate online resource section? Why is the book list not incorporated into the lesson plan? I don't care. The fact that those resources exist and were thoughtfully created to make this curriculum more well-rounded is enough for me, period. Okay, I had to turn the computer screen off because the glare was driving me crazy. So where was I? I think there are benefits to the approach of kind of using this Eurocentric history, this Eurocentric version of history as your spine. Even taking into consideration everything I just said about secular not being enough. But you learn Eurocentric history is the version that's most widely taught, right, in our country. And it's often what we see reflected in the media and in politics. We're then learning what the dominant narrative has prioritized, has valued, has spread. When we encounter this kind of biased, incomplete version as our first encounter, and then we get to compare it to other perspectives, I feel like that helps us develop critical thinking, media literacy, historical empathy. I think a lot of good things can come from it if it's done correctly. Starting with a known framework and then adding complexity, I feel like you can then start to more easily see how different groups experience the same global event, colonization, industrialization, whatever. It can be really overwhelming to try to figure out what resources are good and what resources are problematic. Trust me, I know. I've been stuck in this state of overwhelm, I think, for a while. And I think that feeling of overwhelm sometimes prompts us to just default to, I'm just going to pick this one, it's secular, that's enough, and move on. So there's that. But I think we talk about this this issue kind of as it relates to history a lot, but it's really relevant across all subjects. Even science is something that I am starting to really be looking at, the secular label and what does that mean? When the history or context of a scientific concept is brought up, sorry, I just got a text, is mentioned, are they centering it on white Western male scientists? Are they missing the contributions of Islamic or Chinese or indigenous peoples? that's something I'm starting to look at in science. This is a process for me, as you know, I'm learning as I go. Secular language arts curriculums also have their issues. I'm beginning to kind of see, and this was something that I've really struggled with because both in history and in language arts, I think book lovers, I'm a book lover, can kind of get lulled into this, the living book kind of curriculums, the literature-based curriculums, the Charlotte Mason approach, because the beautiful books, right? Like they have so many beautiful books and we want to use them all. And we love the books, but I guess we may say, like, how can classic literature, how can engaging narratives, how can rich storytelling be bad? Well, it can in a way. And I think that's kind of the pitfall of some of these, is that a lot of like the living books that these curriculums use, and I guess the curriculum itself that are built around the living books, they have significant limitations in that they can lack diversity. I feel like, tend to have a lot of gender stereotypes, or kind of the family unit is presented in a certain way, non-inclusive worldviews, the Eurocentric kind of narratives. And I think I tend to steer more towards like a Build Your Library or a Torchlight over like a Bookshark or Learning Language Arts Through Literature, or some of those. Even though I love the idea of those, I think I tend to lean more towards Bookshark, or I think I tend to lean more towards like a Build Your Library or a Torchlight, because of the types of novels that they include, rather than just like the classic literature. Now, it doesn't mean that we'll never read classic novels, but I want to be intentional and not accidentally ignore the fact that I might be presenting all of these things as the norm and forget that I need to kind of balance out those classic novels. The one thing that I have found, I feel like as far as secular language arts, to me, Hearth and Story is so far one of the few for me that creates a better balance of the idea that being secular, but also being progressive and kind of diverse. So there's that. Sorry, that's my printer. I even have an example as far as like our writing curriculum. So we've used several things from IEW, and some IEW is considered secular and some of it is marketed as Christian, and they let you know that. But we've used secular items in terms of the grammar and like structure and style writing. I haven't really had issues with the grammar, but as it relates to the writing, I still have to be careful. We like structure and style. We're using the methods again this year, but in the one we did last year, in one of the kind of earlier on videos, Mr. Poudois was kind of addressing the class, and he was talking about writing an interesting story and including a problem or conflict. And he said, I gotta find this in my notes because I don't want to get it wrong. He said to the class, this is why sometimes sweet little girls write dull stories, because sweet little girls are sweet little girls and they don't like problems and conflict. They want a nice, happy universe where all the characters are happy. So in this case, I was doing the lesson with my daughter, who, by the way, is not a sweet little girl who likes sweet little girl stories without conflict or problems. She's like the complete opposite of that little picture he just created. But we could talk about how outrageous of a claim this was and how, garbage it was. And then we could kind of be on the lookout for that type of thing. But it certainly doesn't fit my definition of secular, progressive, liberal, inclusive. But I didn't toss it. I addressed it. But it bothers me that I have to accommodate it. But here we are. I think that there's a lot of secular curriculum that tries harder, so to speak. They try to be decolonized and inclusive, but they're not perfect. Oh Freedom, River of Voices, A History of... All right, sorry. My phone keeps filling up and I have to keep stopping and deleting things. So I was talking about how a lot of secular curriculum is trying to be decolonized or inclusive or whatever, but they're not perfect. So I was talking about Oh Freedom and River of Voices and The History of Us, and they all have both some positive and some negative things about them, as does Core Knowledge. But we just have to make sure that we're making, I have to make sure, you can do whatever you want. I have to make sure that I am making the effort to evaluate and see where the flaws are, so that I can supplement if the rest of it works for us. And what works for me, it may not work for you, and that's okay. But you have to know these things, I feel like. So for me so far, I feel like there's only been 3 curriculum or curriculum companies that are like, I feel like as close to perfect for us as we can get. And that's Curiosity Chronicles, that is Mint and Bloom, and that is Hearth and Story. Those happen to work for us, and to me those are like so far the closest that I've gotten. Just my opinion. So I guess that's a little bit about like why for me secular is not enough anymore. What I'm looking for in truly inclusive curriculum is authors from diverse backgrounds, diverse racial and cultural and gender identities, voices from Indigenous people, queer people, disabled people, immigrant communities, opportunities within that curriculum for us to ask, whose story is this? Whose story is missing? Representation of family, of gender, and I guess just identity as not as fixed, if that makes sense, not as these fixed ideas or definitions. And then tools for my kids to be able to analyze the systems of power. I think that that's really important, and to tell their own stories. So for me, deciding that we wanted to be secular homeschoolers was just kind of the first step and the first decision. It's a journey. It has been a journey. It will continue to be a journey. And I've learned through that journey that for us, secular is not enough. It's only the beginning. So my advice to you, even though you didn't ask for it, I'll give it anyway. My advice to you, my advice to myself is to be critical, to be curious, and be willing to kind of tear apart what doesn't serve you. Tear it apart, break it down. Don't destroy it. Take out what's not serving you. Be aware of what's not serving you. Be aware of where it's lacking, so that you can make sure you're building back in what it needs. Because the goal for us is not just to avoid religion. It's to create a space for truth, for justice, for complexity, for different viewpoints, for discussion, for critical thinking, for all the things. So that's all I have. Those are my thoughts on why secular is not enough, and what kind of has been going through my mind and the journey that we've taken in our secular homeschooling. So draw me a comment down below. Tell me what you're using, what you've had to fix, or what curriculum gets it right for you. Yeah, and then do all the things that I'm supposed to tell you to do, but always feels awkward. Like, share, subscribe. Subscribe if you also, like me, are trying to raise question askers, not box checkers. All right, thanks for watching. Go check out Michelle's video. I'll talk to you down in the comments.